guys! October was kind of a terrible reading month, or not even kind of, it was a pretty bad reading month, both in terms of how much I read and the quality of the books I read. I ended up DNFing 2 books. I was very frustrated with another 2, and I might possibly DNF one of those, but I did complete another one. Let's get fully into it. There was one book that I really, really loved, but that's like the only thing that was really good. So the first book I read was Coraline by Neil Gaiman and P. Craig Russell because I read the graphic novel version of this. I'd only ever seen the movie. I haven't read the book yet, but I decided to pick up the graphic novel because I saw it on someone's booktube channel and they convinced me because it was spooky time. This is about a girl who just wants to go on adventures and explore, but she feels very bored and unloved by her parents. So she ends up finding a little door where when she goes through it, everything pretty much seems the same, except her parents are super loving and super doting. The only problem is they want her to stay with them forever and sew buttons over her eyes. So it is a pretty creepy story, but it is middle grade, so it's not as scary as it could be, which is perfect for me because I'm a wimp. I thought that the art in this graphic novel also really matched the tone of the story. It was really, really creepy. I didn't personally like the art, but I think that it matches the story really well, so I can appreciate it. I couldn't really get the full effect of Gaiman's writing because a lot of it is just in the image form as a graphic novel rather than just like transcribing the entire book. So I was a little bit disappointed with that, but I will probably pick up the book next year when spooky time comes around again. I would recommend it still. I think it's a good adaptation and it's a fantastic story. Next, I finished the second book in the Queens of Renthia series, which was TheReluctant Queen by Beth Durst. This is a YA fantasy series that I absolutely loved the first book. I love the world in it so much. However, this book, the plot kind of fell through a little bit. I loved the 2 new characters who were introduced. They were really, really interesting. One of them was very admirable and I loved her strength. The other one was just so fascinating in her immorality. It was just a joy to watch. However, there were a lot of issues with the plot. It was very, very slow and sedentary. The first book was a lot of traveling and exploring. This book is set solely in the castle really, and you don't really go anywhere and it feels very self-contained. And then sort of building off of that, it seems like the characters in the story kind of exist in this little bubble where supposedly they're ruling over this world full of people, and yet no one really comes in from the outside to kind of point out what some of the consequences of their actions would be. Like there's a whole plot line from the first book that has no real consequence in the second book. Like it's not even brought up when this major thing happened that I'm sure people would want to know why or how, and it was just never addressed. So that kind of makes the stakes not seem very real. Even when there's on-page violence, it doesn't feel real. There's like a disconnect between how high the book says the stakes are and then how high it actually appears to be through the writing. There are also sections of the book where certain characters just disappear for periods of time. It was a little bit weird. I think that's more of like an editing thing. And similar to that, there were random bits of information about the wolf that were just kind of thrown in there and weren't really interwoven with the story very well, so they kind of stood out as odd, and I can see why they were there because it looks like that's setting up for the third book, but I don't think it's set up that plot line very well at all. And then just some basic character things where I feel like Ven should be much more phased after the events of the first book than he was. He seemed way too calm and easygoing about it, so there's just a little bit of character work and plot work I think that needs to go into the story. I still really love the world. If you want to hear more about that, you can check my wrap up where I go over the first book in this series. I've forgotten the name of it, but it'll be up in that video. So go ahead and check that if you want to know more about the world. And I really did love the first book a lot. The second book just wasn't quite right for me. It was still enjoyable and a light read, but it wasn't what I was hoping it would be after the first book. The next book is the one book this month that I absolutely loved, and that was The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. I listened to this on audiobook with the full cast, and it is so good. Please do that. It's fantastic. I also was listening to it mainly on one day at work when it was super dark and rainy all day, and it was just the perfect atmosphere for it. I loved my experience so much with that. This is another middle grade from Gaiman about a boy who ends up being raised by a graveyard of ghosts. It's pretty episodic in the first couple chapters, but then they all tend to tie together in the end into one overarching storyline. I think that sort of setup makes a lot of sense for a middle grade novel, so I really appreciated that. This is full of a huge cast of really lovable characters. The tone is just perfect for the spooky time, and it was just the right amount of spook where it wasn't too scary, but it also gives you the sort of vibes that you're looking for at this time of year, and it was just so good. The way that Gaiman writes is always very like whimsical and flowery, and it just fits with the story so well. And I was seriously tearing up while at work at the end of this book. It was I loved this book so much. It was so enjoyable and so sweet, and I would highly recommend it, especially on that audiobook version. If not, even the book I'm sure would be fantastic, or the audiobook narrated by Neil Gaiman, because I know he does a version of it as well. I really loved the cast of characters. You get a lot of different voices and music as well. It's so good, and it's such a kind of heartwarming, sort of spooky, like, whole experience. It is an experience, and I want everyone to experience it because it's so good. And then from here we start going more downhill. I read Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse, which was the Sword and Laser book club pick for, I think, last month, September. I think I read it late. But I've been meaning to read this book for a really long time. It's an urban fantasy based on Navajo myths and legends, and it's a post-apocalyptic world where a natural disaster has completely flooded out like most of the world, and there's only a few little areas of the country that still are running. And one of those is the original Navajo Reserve. And in addition to most of the world being wiped out, it seems like the legends and myths from Navajo folklore are coming to life and basically attacking humanity. So I really love this world. I thought it was so interesting, especially because I don't know anything about Navajo myths and folklore, so it was such a treat to be able to learn a bit through this book. However, I didn't like anything else about this book at all. I could not stand the writing style or the character or the storytelling. The character is very supposed to be badass and like super tough and super strong, and so she has this really annoying cocky tone that gets on my nerves so much because it's told in first person, so you're seeing it from her perspective and you get the way that she narrates things in her head, and it was driving me up the wall. There's a lot of sentence fragments and just really clunky writing and a lot of really cheesy flashbacks that I was literally rolling my eyes every other page with something that she said or some sort of plot point that ended up being like really obvious. Because also this story is very cliche. The whole plot is nothing we haven't seen before. It's very, very typical, and the whole badass characterization was also very cliche, and I was just getting so frustrated with this book. The only reason I was actually able to make it through is because it's so short. It's like 200 pages or something, so I was like, you know what, I'm just going to put up with it and push through it because it's won so many awards and it's gotten so much acclaim that I want to know why everyone loves this book. So I ended up finishing it, didn't like it the whole way through, and I don't think I will be continuing with the series. Actually, I won't be continuing with the series because I cannot stand that writing style. I wish it was written in a bit of a different way because I really love the world and I think a lot of interesting things can be done with that, but I cannot stand the writing at all. And then I found that I was having that problem again in my next book, which is Seven Blades in Black by Sam Sykes. I've not finished this book. This one I am considering DNFing just because, similar to Trail of Lightning, this has a really badass main character with a really annoying tone because it's being narrated from her perspective, and The sentence fragments are driving me up the wall. There are floating pronouns that don't seem to be attached to anything, so it's making it really confusing to follow what's going on. The names in the story are really weird, where they're like phrases of things like red cloud or 72 broken flowers in a broken vase or something. How am I supposed to know that refers to a person? What? I don't even know how to describe the plot of this because it's really big. It's a classic fantasy series in that way, an epic fantasy series. It has this huge world. There's like two sides with an empire and then revolutionaries, and then there's like people who are not part of either side with the vagrants, and they have magic, and they're all like trying to beat each other, and it's really confusing. There are a lot of questions raised in this book that I have no answers to, even though I'm like a quarter of the way through the book, which I guess isn't really that far. But this is a really big book, so a quarter of the book turns out to be like 220 pages, and I am not liking those 220 pages, which is why I've stopped reading it for now. I have not fully decided if I want to DNF it. I'm leaning toward DNFing it just because I really can't stand the tone again. If Trail of Lightning was bad with the cocky tone, this one's even worse. So I was able again to get through Trail of Lightning because it was short. This is not short. This is not short. This is like 600 pages of just frustration, really, for me. I wish, again, that was written differently because I feel like this could be a really interesting story, and if you don't have a problem with that sort of writing style, then I think it would be a good book. If that writing jives with you more, I think you would be able to enjoy this book, but I just am not getting along with it really well. I can't stand these conceited characters. It's driving me insane. So this is kind of like an odd one just because I haven't finished it, but I also haven't officially DNF'd it, but I am leaning towards DNFing it, so I don't know. Let me know what I should do. Let me know if you've read this at all. This is relatively new. I think it came out in April of this year, so I haven't heard anyone mention it at all. I didn't know what this book was until it was a Sword and Laser book club pick, obviously, for October, because that's the only reason I pick up books that I don't really know. So if you have any information on this, if it gets any better, if it's worth it in the end, I don't know. Let me know because I am just very on the fence with this book right now. I also just posted a reading vlog where I was mainly reading this book, and you can see my thoughts more in real time. I will link that as well if you're interested. So at the end of the month, I also participated in E-Book-A-Thon, which I will leave all the information for down below. And if you saw my TBR video, you would know that I was not very hopeful, I guess I would say, about my selections for this readathon. I was mainly choosing books to see if I would like them at all or if I could just DNF them quickly and get them off of my phone. And so I wasn't really expecting to fall in love with the books I was reading, and I was pretty much spot on. The first book I tried to read was A Lying Witch by Odette. I DNF'd this at 35%, which sounds like a lot, but it's a very, very short ebook, and so 35% really corresponded to like maybe 30 minutes of reading, if that. But this is about a deadbeat girl who is just making money by being a fortune teller online and kind of just spouting lies to whoever wants to pay her $3. And she ends up inheriting a house from her grandmother as well as a curse. So she very quickly finds out, finds out that magic is real and that she now has a sexy Scottish bodyguard to protect her from this dangerous magic. So even from the synopsis, you can kind of tell what sort of story this will be. It's not my kind of story, in short. The writing is really bad. Again, it's very clunky and very, very cheesy. It's like the tone is trying to be this like 2011 YA romance, paranormal romance, and it's not a good look. There were some really obnoxious metaphors and similes that I was just rolling my eyes at. Same with the very tropey romance descriptions. The guy is said to be like so good looking and talks in a low voice and is constantly crossing his arms, and I'm just like, please stop. The editing is also kind of terrible. There was one scene in particular that was probably 15% of that first 35%, and it went on forever needlessly. They just kept going back and forth, and they're like, I have powers? Yes, you do. But magic isn't real. I can't have powers. Magic's real. You have powers. But no, that can't be. Oh, wait, but I remember using my powers like an hour ago when you taped me to a chair and pulled a knife on me. But magic isn't real. Yes, it is. It was endless. It was so stupid, and it went on for so long, and it was so unnecessary. So this writing could definitely use a bit more work. You could tell that it was a pretty new author, and I just was not interested in dealing with that sort of writing or those characters or where this plotline was going, because it was pretty obvious from the start. So I DNF'd this. So because I had that sort of experience with that book, I decided to pick up the other book I had by this author on my readathon list, and that was A Time of Kings by Odette again. And again, I DNF'd this at 11% this time. There was definitely some improvement in the storytelling between A Lying Witch and A Time of Kings. A Lying Witch was written in 2016, and A Time of Kings was written in 2018. But there were still so many issues. It's about a dream shaman who escapes from the royal family who have a monopoly on all of the dream shamans. And these dream shamans are capable of bestowing king-like powers onto other people. So at the beginning of the book, one of them escapes, and then you go through a time jump and you get introduced to the escapee's apprentice and their house that's been broken into, and that's literally as far as I got because I was just not feeling it again. It was the same cheesy writing except with extra typos, which was really odd actually. And the pacing was still wrong, the writing was still painful, and I was just not in the mood to deal with that. The story is definitely already more complex, and I can appreciate that. I can appreciate how she's grown as an author to sort of encompass more in her stories, but I would prefer a more polished version of the book with some better editing before I pick it up and want to finish it. So I DNF'd that, and I will not be reading anything from Odette again, most likely. And those were all of the books I finished in October. Not very much, considering a lot of them were DNFs. I'm not going to be too hard on myself. I did take the GRE this month, and I will be applying for my PhD programs in November and December, and then the holidays are coming up, so it's going to get very, very busy for me in the next couple of months, and I don't feel like I'm going to be reading a lot. I mean, I have literally the Dragon Republic right here from R.F. Kuang out from my library, and I've had it for like a month and I have not started it because I just don't feel like I have the time necessary to read this book. So I don't know how my reading is going to fare in these last couple months or my video making, but we'll see. I will try to balance everything, but I am going to prioritize my education, obviously, so we'll see where it goes from there. Hopefully I will still be able to read some more books and get some of those end of the year videos out in time as well. So let me know any of your thoughts on any of the books that I've talked about today. Let me know what you loved reading in October, if you found another spooky but not too spooky read that I might be interested in next year, and I will see you later. Bye!